Our top focus at this hour, 50 pro-democracy activists have been arrested in Hong Kong under the new national security law imposed by Beijing. This happens to be the biggest crackdown yet against the pro-democracy activists under the new national security law. Well-known democracy figures and former lawmakers James Tu, Lam Cheuk Ting and Lester Shum have been arrested by the police. The opposition figures and parties took to their Facebook and Twitter accounts to confirm at least 21 arrests, most on charges of subversion. Lam Cheuk Ting was one of the several former lawmakers arrested. He posted a video showing what he said was the moment of his arrest, where the police entered his property before putting him in handcuffs. The Democratic Party's Facebook page said that the activists were arrested for participating in an independently organized ballot last year. The vote was to elect the Democrat candidates for an upcoming legislature election, and at that time the Hong Kong government along with Beijing issued a warning that it may violate the new law. It is important to note that the elections were later scrapped altogether. Pro-democracy activist Joshua Wong, currently in prison, also tweeted that his home was searched by the National Security Police in the same operation. Joshua Wong's Twitter handle is currently managed by his friends. The leaders across America have condemned the arrests of the pro-democracy activists. Antony Blinken, Joe Biden's chosen Secretary of State, in a tweet said that the sweeping arrests of the pro-democracy demonstrators are an assault on those bravely advocating for universal rights. The Biden-Harris administration will stand with the people of Hong Kong and against Beijing's crackdown on democracy. Taiwan's government, meanwhile, said that it was shocked at the latest arrests of pro-democracy activists in Hong Kong and that the city-state has changed from the Pearl of the Orient to a purgatory of the Orient. The Vice President of Taiwan took to Twitter and condemned these protests. He said, and I quote, "China's crackdown on democracy will not be ignored by the world. More than 50 prominent democratic advocates were arrested today in Hong Kong. This is unacceptable. Hong Kongers' rights are human rights." The new security law was imposed by Beijing in June last year. It punishes what China broadly defines as secession, subversion, terrorism and collusion with foreign forces with up to life in jail. The law has been condemned by the West and human rights groups as a mere tool to crush dissent in the semi-autonomous Chinese-ruled city. Authorities in Hong Kong and Beijing say that it is vital to plug gaping holes in national security defences, which were exposed by months of anti-government and anti-China protests that rocked Hong Kong in 2019. For more on this story, Richard Kimba, our correspondent, is joining us live from Hong Kong. Hi, Richard. Welcome to WION. Now, this happens to be the biggest crackdown yet in Hong Kong. 50 pro-democracy activists arrested on charges of subversion. Tell us more about these charges and the legal course that is now available to these activists.
Yes, well, this was a real shock to all pro-democracy activists and democracy supporters here in Hong Kong this morning when they woke up and saw the news across social media that so many pro-democracy campaigners here had been arrested all in one go. The reason for this is basically the pre-election primaries that were organised in July last year came just a few weeks after the introduction of the national security law. Now, primaries are not a formal part of the election process here. Instead, the pan-democratic parties organised primaries because they thought it would help them achieve their goal of achieving a majority in the legislature in the elections that were supposed to have happened last September. Their goal was to try and get 35 out of the 70 seats there, and in so doing achieve at least parity, if not then a majority in the legislature. The Chief of Security here in Hong Kong just an hour ago said, though, that he believed that their plan was much bigger than that, and that instead their ultimate plan was to then veto all government bills if they were able to achieve that majority, including the government budget, and effectively then force the Chief Executive to resign. And that is why, he said, the police have then taken action against everybody involved in those primaries to try and stop them ever achieving that goal and ensure the stability of Hong Kong's governance.
Right. Now, Richard, we've had Western powers criticizing China over its crackdown on dissent, including recently a statement from the Biden-Harris administration. And yet, the Chinese regime is unperturbed. So what does this effectively mean for dissent in Hong Kong?
Well, looking through the list of names of those who have been arrested this morning, it really doesn't leave many people left. We've already, of course, had many high-profile former lawmakers and activists leave Hong Kong because they're afraid of being arrested. And those that have not left, many of them have already been arrested. So after this morning's events, there really is only a handful of people who have previously been at the forefront of the pro-democracy campaign who are still effectively free citizens. That's obviously caused a chilling effect throughout society here. And there are very few people now willing to continue to speak out and stand out against what has effectively been a series of high-profile arrests since this security law was introduced. There are sympathisers for the law, however. There have been press conferences today also from pro-establishment lawmakers and from business groups saying that this series of arrests will indeed help to secure the stability of Hong Kong's long-term future.
Right. Richard, my final question. There have been plenty of high-profile arrests in Hong Kong recently, specifically of pro-democracy activists. So what then is the future of democracy in Hong Kong, which was an intrinsic part of its social fabric?
Well, increasingly what we're seeing now is lobbyists overseas, many of whom are former Hong Kong activists who have left the city to go and try and help the cause by being in jurisdictions such as the UK or in the US or in Canada. They're trying to lobby those governments to put more formal pressure on China and on Hong Kong in the form of sanctions, not just talk, not just rhetoric, but actual economic and trade sanctions. And so what they're doing overseas is trying to rally the cause, not here in Hong Kong anymore, but to try and get proper international cooperation to put an end to this series of actions that the Hong Kong and Beijing governments are taking in Hong Kong.
Right, Richard, we leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us on this broadcast and all your inputs.